essay that will be discussing today with the metaphysical poets. So this is a very easy essay to understand also. It's not very difficult, but some of the features of this essay I'll discuss. I've also given some critical notes on our academic blog in December 2017, if I'm right. I will also pass on the link to you, but I would just suggest that you use them as a prop, as a support, not necessarily rely on that alone for your exams. Be creative. This is your almost penultimate semester of your MA program. So I would suggest that you be as creative as possible in coming out with your own perspectives to a particular essay, any essay, right, that is given to you to analyze, right? So you should be able to do it from a reflective, from an intellectual, from an analytical, any perspective that is given to you. Finally evaluate it from your own perspective. That matters because you also have your own wonderful perspective to life, to things, to essays, to literature, right? And celebrate that. So this part, I'll just give you an idea of how to approach this particular essay. The metaphysical poets, as we all know, until the 20th century, they were in oblivion. They were completely in oblivion. That's because of some critics in the past, because critics were considered powerful next only to the creators, right? They took the place of a demigod or the high priest of literature. So whatever they prescribed was highly extolled, valued, etc. But whatever they proscribed means did not prescribe, the opposite of prescribe, that was condemned into literary oblivion. And that is how, Dr. Johnson, a whole lot of these critics of the past, they devalued the worth and the intrinsic merit of the metaphysical poets. And so what happened was, until the 20th century, they were in oblivion. Now, in the 20th century, there was a professor. His name is Professor Grierson. And this professor compiled a wonderful list of poems from the 17th century. And he gave it a beautiful title. Metaphysical Poets of the 17th century. He gave it a title. Now, T.S. Eliot happened to read this book. Just imagine, because this was something I bought 2 weeks ago. Every Tuesdays, as I told you, I go to a bookstall very close to my house in Annanagar and buy a couple of books. Not much, just 2 or 3 books I'll buy. And in that particular week, I promise myself that I'll finish it and then go the next Tuesdays. I go only because completely free. The mall will be so free, calm, and serene. No one will be there to disturb you. When you read a book, especially, you don't want anyone to be around you. No, so out of a very selfish interest, I do that. Right. So this is the book I bought, a new collection that reveals the spirit of a wounded island. Right. This is the book. Time will write a song for you. Contemporary Tamil writing from Sri Lanka. I found this, I've never read much from Sri Lanka, but since Sri Lankan writing is also prescribed for us, The Fisherman Mourned by His Wife. So this, beautiful collection, you'll see the poems also here, was compiled by one person, right? So I'll give you his name also. Edited and translated by Kannan M. Rebecca Whittington, Sendil Babu, David Buck. A collection, an anthology, right, of poetry, prose that was unsung or that was not known to the world, that has been compiled by a group of poets. Some of them are also professors. Similarly, Professor Grierson wanted to compile poets who were unsung but had their own intrinsic merit to them. So he compiled and published them in a collection. See the work of a professor, right? How noble a thing a professor can do, right? When he or she can revive unsung heroes and heroines of the past and revive them back, bring them back to life, celebrate them after centuries of forgetfulness or oblivion. That is the power of any professor for that matter, right? So Professor Grierson did this, and T.S. Eliot happened or chanced to read that particular book, like this book, right, that I am reading. Now, after reading this book as a teacher or as a professor, can I come out with an essay on this book that is critical essay after reading a collection like this, right? A compilation of poetry, an anthology of poetry, prose, and other texts. Will I be able to come out with a 3,187 word essay the way that T.S. Eliot was able to do in the Metaphysical Poets? Just around 3,187 words, he wrote a wonderful, brilliant, short, critical essay. Remember, we discussed in one of our previous classes what is the definition of criticism given by M.H. Abrams. He says criticism defines, classifies, analyzes, evaluates, and interprets what a work of art, any work of art. Right? That is the value of a literary critic. We also discussed there are two types of critic, the academic critic, the public critic. So a literary critic should be able to evaluate, analyze, classify. How will she do that? Only if she has read exhaustively. Only if she has a panoramic bird's eye view of the entire literary arena. Just by reading one author or one poet, I cannot do a critical evaluation, because remember, Heraclitus told us the mind cannot bring forth its own offspring unless it is washed by a vast river of literature. So here you will see the scholarship of T.S. Eliot in display when he comes out with such a wonderful critical piece of 3,187 words. And see how he starts. It's a very unbiased piece, a kind of, right? Although his passions come into play at places, but he has tried to give two sides, right? Both the sides of the argument. An argument has both the sides, and a critical essay should, assess that particular book from both the sides, the merits as well as the demerits of the case, like a feature article or an editorial will do or is intended to do. Right. So here, if I'm going to say, oh, aha, this is wonderful, wonderful, that means it doesn't pass off as a critical piece. I have to also list out if there are any shortcomings about this book. Right. And why is this book important? This critical collection. Nobody else has attempted something like this. So why is this important? And why have they been forgotten for long? And so what I will do is, beginning, I will appreciate the professors who were responsible for bringing out this wonderful anthology of poets. First thing I'll do. Secondly, I will try to compare the poets in this volume with the poets of the past and see why they are special. What is special about their poetic features, their style, their charm? What makes these poets, good? But why were they ignored all these years, all these centuries? And I will also say the demerits. Towards the end, he also gives the demerits of the book. He says, I have a wonderful poet who has been ignored, right? Townshend, who has been ignored. I would have been happier if Professor Grierson had included his poems also in the collection. See how much he should have read. A Nobel laureate, I think 1948, he got his Nobel Prize. And see, a Nobel laureate, very vastly read, very widely read. And now in this essay, you will find a whole lot of poets, critics, scholars. He lists and enumerates them with their specific style and characteristic from his own perspective. And that is the beauty of a critical essay. If I were to write a critical essay on this book, a kind of a review also, right? You can call it a review, but a critical essay, because the mind of the writer also is there, right? The own thoughts of the writer. It's not he's not a catalyst alone here. The mind of and their unique thoughts also come into play here. Their own perceptions, Right? How does he do that? How does T.S. Eliot do that in this particular uh, essay? I'll just go into the text for you. Right. So I'm just quickly going through it because just an idea, and this will be asked for your literary criticism. I didn't want to give a test actually, but because already many are giving, but I was asked to give. So I'm just if it is a part of your CAs, this will be asked for your literary criticism paper, right? So the Metaphysical Poets by T.S. Eliot, you'll find, when was it published in Times Literary Supplement in 1921 on 20th October. Even today, the Times Literary Supplement is very famous. I hope you're all reading it. A wonderful, critical review that gives you insights into books, into authors, interviews, a whole lot of things. I cannot pass it on by WhatsApp because it is 65 MB in PDF. So it's very difficult, but you can access them online also by paying a premium. Excuse me. Yeah. So first, he gives the appreciation. He gives the pat on the back. By collecting these poems from the work of a generation, more often named than read. See the expression. They were named, but they were not read. And more often read than profitably studied. See how beautifully he starts, no? More often named than read, more often read than profitably studied. I would like to, plunge deep into this beautiful essay by Eliot because Eliot is one of my, favorite poets of all time. Even for my first lecture demonstration that I did 19 years ago for the American College Madurai, where I was my first stint as a professor, as a teacher. Right, I started only with T.S. Eliot's tradition and the individual talent. I like him so much, right? I love him so much, and his style especially. By hearted tons and tons, or volumes and volumes of his, poetic lines, wasteland or four quartets, or even his plays, right? So here, just you can absorb it into your system. Look at that. He says more often named than read, more often read than profitably studied. Why were they not profitably studied? Because of a generation of critics who did injustice to the merit of these poets. Because the critics, as I said earlier, were like demigods. They could make or mar the reputation of anybody. Right? So much was their power. Critics were revered, next only to philosophers. So if they say this is bad, it is bad. The politics of reviewing, even today in the United States, there are reams and reams of paper white written on the politics behind book reviews or cinema reviews. If the media wants to extol somebody, they will extol it. If the media wants to downplay somebody, they will downplay it. The review world, right? You will find some of the books in the New York bestseller, but nobody will know that. I'm just giving you names as a metaphor, right? So any review for that matter, any review that you find, is it really neutral? Have they been profitably studied, or their personal prejudices come into play while reviewing a book, right? So here, they were not profitably studied, is the hint that Eliot gives us. Professor Grierson, he appreciates Professor Grierson. He has rendered a service of some importance. Certainly, the reader will meet with many poems already preserved in other anthologies at the same time that he discovers poems such as those of Aurelian Townshend or Lord Herbert of Sherbury here included. People who were not hitherto known have been included here, like Aurelian Townshend or Lord Herbert of Sherbury. But the function of this anthology, why did this anthology come out? This is just a representation, because I can't go collecting that 17th century compilation that he did in the early 20th century. I don't have it with me. So this is just a metaphoric connect. Right? So he says the function of this anthology is neither that of Professor Sainsbury's admirable edition of Carolyn Poets, nor that of the Oxford Book of English Work, but Mr. Grierson's book is in itself a piece of criticism, and that's the most important word. I love it. A provocation of criticism. Right? What Derrida says, now think about the structurality of structure. Think about what is special about this criticism. Makes you go give a second look. Wow, this is criticism, right? Provocation of criticism. And we think that he was right in including so many poems of Donne. For example, if so many poems of Patrick Fernando were included here, I should justify, right, that the uh, the editor was right in including these poems, these many poems of this writer. So he's appreciating Donne. Elsewhere, though not in many editions accessible as documents in the case of metaphysical poetry. So now he talks about the phrase called metaphysical poetry. The phrase has long done duty as a term of abuse or as the label of a quaint and pleasant taste. So now he defines what is metaphysical poetry. We will talk, when we write an essay, we will talk about dowry harassment, but we will not define what is dowry, right? Doing injustice to the topic. So he's talking about the metaphysical poets, but he has to give an explanation on what is metaphysical poetry and how the term came in vogue. So now he's doing that. The phrase metaphysical has long done duty as a term of abuse or has the label of a quaint and pleasant taste. Quaint means strange. The question is to what extent the so-called metaphysicals formed a school. This, if you can look at it from a different perspective, this is when you do an MA dissertation or an MPhil dissertation or a PhD thesis, they will ask you for the research question. What is the research question, right? So you should be able to give a research question that will form the thesis statement. So what is the question? Now see how beautifully he says, the question is, that's the question. Please remember this. The question is, to what extent the so-called metaphysicals formed a school? In our own time, we should say a movement. And how far the so-called school or movement is a digression from the main current. See how beautifully it's narrowed down. An essay should have a scope. It should be narrow in its ambit, not very broad in its ambit. Then it will become a book, right? So now he himself admits, not only is it extremely difficult to define metaphysical poetry, but difficult to decide what poets practice it and in which of their verses, right? He himself admits to the difficulty of the enterprise that he is venturing into. The poetry of Donne, now look at the names that he's giving us, a whole lot of names. Marvell, Bishop King, right? Johnson, Herbert, Vaughan, Crashaw, Christina Rossetti, Francis Thompson. See the poets that he has read and compared with. I'm not going to that because we have less time, and the Tata Literary Fest is also live there. I just listened to Marcus Zuzak and a whole lot of other writers who were live, who are almost must have finished now, right? And a whole lot of Ruskin Bond is there today this evening. You can listen to them. Please take some time off your other schedules and listen to them, right? You will feel transformed, right? You'll feel energized in a literary way, right? So I'm just coming into the sentences that I've highlighted in yellow. Just have a look at that. It is difficult to find any precise use of metaphor, simile, or other conceit, which is common to all the poets. Now you know what's the question, right? Which is common to all the poets and at the same time important enough as an element of style to isolate these poets as a group. Donne and often Coley employ a device which is sometimes considered characteristically metaphysical, right? They employ a device. Now you come to the point, right? They employ a device which is sometimes considered characteristically metaphysical, typically metaphysical. right? The elaboration of a figure of speech to the furthest stage to which ingenuity can carry it, right? Thus, right, Cowley develops the commonplace comparison of the world to a chessboard. How you can connect heterogeneous elements that Johnson tells us heterogeneous elements, ideas are yoked by violence together, right? That's what he says. One device is characteristic to their style. What is that? This is very important, right? Dunn and often Cowley employ a device which is sometimes considered characteristically metaphysical, the elaboration of a figure of speech to the furthest stage to which ingenuity can carry it. The flea, for example, right? Size. Remember in canonization, we in the first semester we did that, right? Have my sighs, right? Drowned, right? Have my tears overflowed the ground? Have my sighs created tempest? Sighs, can they create a tempest? Right. So have they, made ships to capsize? That's what, extending to the farthest extent possible. Now, uh, the last line of the highlighted in yellow, a valediction, the comparison of two lovers to a pair of compasses. Lovers are usually compared in the previous era, right, to the moon, right, to the sun and the moon, a whole lot of things. But here they are compared to a pair of compasses. To the extent heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Now, this example again from valediction on weeping, forbidding weeping. No? Till thy tears mixed with mine do overflow this world. See the comparison. You can't even think about another poet reminiscing like this. My tears that I shed because of the parting, and your tears will mix and it will overflow. Right? Can you, usually, we don't usually normally think of this. Right? Till thy tears mixed with mine do overflow this world. Right? That's the beauty of the metaphysicals. How such wonderful, amazing metaphysical poets were condemned to oblivion by generations and generations of successive critics and poets and writers. How dare, says Eliot. So, and this one in blue, you must have read it, I guess, right? It's from the poem The Relic by Donne. I love this particular expression that he has given. A bracelet of bright hair about the bone, right? This is a beautiful comparison. A bracelet of bright hair about the bone. What is this bracelet of bright hair about the bone? Right? Christians at the judgment day, there is this analogy there that they'll be resurrected, and the souls which are scattered elsewhere, which are elsewhere, will come searching for their bodies. So now what happens is, the sexton who is digging the grave, he's trying to disinter. What is disinter? Disintegration means when a body after a particular period of time decomposes, what they will do is the church authorities, they'll go to the graveyard and disinter, in the sense they will dig it up for other bodies to be cremated or buried, right? So the sexton goes into this grave digging work, and he finds, after many years after the body is decomposed, he finds something surprising. What is that? The lover and his lady love completely decomposed, but he could find only one relic. What is that relic? The hair of the lady love is surrounding the bone of this speaker, right? One strand of hair of the girl is twined or wound around a bone. He finds, the sexton, the grave digger, finds this. And you know what he does? He wants to leave it at that. Right? He says, Okay, they've been so good a pair of lovers in this world. So, at the judgment day, at the last day, when the souls come searching for their bodies, it will be easy for them to find their bodies because it is strung together, a bracelet of bright hair about the bone. Right? See that that's what he says in the next line. This telescoping of images and multiplied associations is characteristic of the phrase of some of the dramatists of the period, which Donne knew. Now you know that particular we saw it here, no, right? One at we saw that, right? One particular feature which is considered characteristically metaphysical. What is that? This one, right? So this image also you can have it in mind. This telescoping of images. Now coming to this, this is all not necessary. Now, right. A good deal resides in the richness of association, which is at the same time borrowed from and given to the word become. Again, that phrase alone you can have in mind. The richness of association that we can't necessarily even think about. Next one highlighted in yellow. The structure of the sentences, on the other hand, is sometimes far from simple, but this is not a vice. It is a fidelity to thought and feeling. This is a very important phrase that recurs again and again in the metaphysical poets. The fidelity to thought and to feeling. Remember in the first semester when we did Donne, I said, from the metaphysical poets, a thought to Donne was an experience. It modified his sensibility. He could think a thought, he could feel a thought as immediately as the odor of a rose. Can you feel a thought? Can you feel? Feeling is different from thinking, they say. But here, this fidelity to thought and feeling, in other words, is called the unification of sensibility. You find only in the 17th century poets, the metaphysical poets. Right? That's what he says. So you can make the mention of this when you write your essay, if at all you write. Right. So, if so shrewd and sensitive a critic as Johnson failed to define metaphysical poetry by its faults, it is worthwhile to inquire whether we may not have more success by adopting the opposite method, by assuming that the poets of the 17th century were the direct and normal development of the precedent age. He is now analyzing, introspecting. Were they a descendant of the previous age? And without prejudicing their case by the adjective metaphysical, consider whether their virtue was not something permanently valuable, which subsequently disappeared, but ought not to have disappeared. That is his thesis, statement. It should not have disappeared. Right? Something more valuable. And now the next line, there is a very important phrase. He says, always analytic. Johnson has said perhaps by accident on one of the peculiarities of the metaphysical poets, which he observes their attempts are always analytic. Please make a note of that. The word analytic is very important to analyze the metaphysical poets. What is analytic? We'll discuss that when we come to, right? And this one, unification of thought and feeling that you find in Donne, right? A recreation of thought into feeling, right? That you find in Donne. The analytic I told you. Now, right? This is Lord Herbert's ode to from Robert. The following for this is from Tennyson. Let's leave that. Yeah, this is most important, right? This is very important. It is something. It is something which has happened to the mind of England between the time of Donne or the Lord Herbert of Cherbury and the time of Tennyson and Browning. It is the difference between the intellectual poet and the reflective poet. Now he classifies them into the intellectual poet and the reflective poet. Tennyson and Browning are poets and they think, but they do not feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose. The intellectual poets and the reflective poets. What are the intellectual poets? The reflective poets are the ones, remember Wordsworth, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origins from emotions recollected in tranquility. They are the reflective poets. They chew, right? They look back and then they write. Reflective. Right? So, but there are also other poets who are the intellectual poets who think something new. What can I think? What can I write? Right? They will always think about something new to write. They are the intellectual poets. Thinking and feeling. Feeling is you are conditioned by all the feelings that are so far accrued in you. Based on that, to me, the meanest flower that blooms, says Wordsworth in his Intimations of Immortality. The last two lines: the meanest flower that blooms can, give room to, emotions that will lie too deep for tears. He says, towards the end. I'm just paraphrasing. The meanest flower that blooms. Reflective poets. But there are also poets who are called intellectual poets, right? Tennyson and Browning are poets and they think, but they don't feel their thought. But a thought to done was an experience, it modified a sensibility. Beautiful, immortal quote from Eliot, right? When a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experience. And yesterday, right, one of you asked me for, I think it was Deepika. I think Deepika is here, right? Deepika asked me for the difference between primary and secondary imagination, right? This will also help you analyze that. I will also give you, because you asked me in class. I did some homework for that, right? Because I also did it in biography literature when I was an MA student, right, almost 20 years back. So I did some work, and this is exactly what he means by the primary and the secondary imagination also, right? The poet's mind is different from the mind of a lay person, right? Now look at that. Uh, when a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, I'm sorry, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experiences. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic. Maybe you can imagine it to be the primary imagination. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic, irregular, fragmentary. The latter falls in love, reads Spinoza, and these two experiences have nothing to do with each other or with the noise of the typewriter or the smell of cooking. But in the mind of the poet, these experiences are always forming new wholes, right? That's the mind of the poet. That is the secondary imagination, the reconstruction that happens in the mind of the poet, right? Uh, we may express the difference by the following theory. The poets of the 17th century, the successors of the dramatists of the 16th, possessed a mechanism of sensibility. This is a beautiful line, right? Anyone would fall for this line. Possessed a mechanism of sensibility which could devour any kind of experience, right? Any experience. It could be the smell of a pressure cooker, right? When the pressure cooker, gives out the whistle, you will get a single, a sense, a fragrance of what is inside. You will get a whiff of a smell also. That also can create a beautiful experience. Anything, right? They are simple, artificial, difficult, or fantastic as their predecessors were, no less nor more than Dante, etc. But unfortunately, in the 17th century, a dissociation of sensibility set in, from which we have never recovered. So there was an unification of sensibility in whom, in the metaphysical poets, what is this unification of sensibility, right? The thinking and feeling gets unified. Tennyson and Browning were thinking poets. Wordsworth and Shelley were feeling poets, but they couldn't, connect both these together. But in these poets, remember in the first few paragraphs is analytic. You find everything coming into a harmonious, homogeneous whole, right? So, right, he accuses Milton and do we have the time? Yeah, he accuses Milton and Dryden as reasons for this dissociation of sensibility, right? So see how bold and daring he must be to accuse them. Now, the sentimental age, he says, began early in the 18th century and continued. The poets revolted against the ratiocinative, the descriptive. They thought and felt by fits, unbalanced, they reflected. Remember, Henry James talks about the stream of consciousness technique. Virginia Woolf describes the stream of consciousness technique, right? Where she says it is a sprinkling of thoughts and emotions. That's exactly what happens, They thought and felt by fits, unbalanced. They reflected. See how he accuses them. He's being very, very argumentative in his approach, right? But Keats and Shelley died, and Tennyson and Browning ruminated. After this brief exposition of a theory, too brief perhaps to carry conviction, we may ask, what would have been the fate of the metaphysical had the current of poetry descended in a direct line from them? Possibly, right? Yeah. The possible interests of, they would not certainly be classified as metaphysical if they had followed them. They wanted to be different from the flow, right? They wanted to go against the grain. That's why they are unique, he says. The possible interests of a poet are unlimited. The more intelligent he is, the better. This is what we mean by analytical. Analytical means more intelligent, and the metaphysicals had it in them, right? The more intelligent he is, the more likely that he will have interests. Our only condition is that he turned them into poetry, right? So, and then he talks about, right? This is also, you can make a note of it. Why it is important to have such poets, right? Who are intelligent, right? Intelligent enough, because only they will be able to make us think. Only then we will be able to defamiliarize their texts, right? What the 20th century critics, the textual critics advocated. The poem he advocated, look at that. We should say that the poets in our civilization must be difficult. You should not write simple poetry, he says. Right? Eliot's poetry is not very easy to understand, some of it, right? So he says it should be difficult. Only then the reader will involve themselves in the exercise of unfolding layers and layers of meaning, right? Footfalls echo in the memory down the passage that we did not take into the rose garden. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. I've literally shed tears when I have read this particular piece from T.S. Eliot. Footfalls echo in the memory down the rose garden. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. When did he write this? In the 1920s. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Just imagine that. Even today, we are not satisfied with the face that we have, with the body that we have. Cannot bear very much reality. We always go for, even if there is a beautiful photo of us, we'll try to morph it into something better. Apply a fairness, app to it, make it so beautiful. So I always want to be ideal. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Right? Footfalls echo in the memory. So he says you should be difficult. Only then it can be universalized, the experience, he says. Right? Complex. Look at that. Our civilization comprehends great variety and complexity. And this variety and complexity, playing upon a refined sensibility, must produce various and complex results. The poet must become more and more comprehensive, more allusive. Allusive means what? Indirect. More indirect, in order to force, to dislocate if possible, language into his meaning. Right? So I'll just try to conclude it. Right? So he appreciates the French masters because they were masters of diction, but also psychologists. They were so intelligent souls. See, the most curious explorer of the soul. He appreciates the French masters. But he says in England, in English, you don't have such masters who delved into the soul as well as intelligent. Milton and Dryden are not good masters, he says. Like the French have good masters to emulate. See how he accuses them, right? And see, these three lines are so beautiful. How should a poem be, he says, Donne looked into a good deal more than the heart, beyond the heart. One must look into the cerebral cortex, the nervous system, and the digestive tracts, not only at the heart. You should go within, deep within, he says, right? That is the power of an intelligent poet, he says, right? You should be allusive, you should not be direct. Only then the reader will find enjoyment in the poem, right? How can you be allusive? Using a lot of metaphysical conceits, literary tropes, figurative figures of speech, figurative tropes, whatever, right? But allusive should be there. Allusion should be there. Only then ambiguity, William Emerson talks about ambiguity, right? Right. And see the last one, he appreciates him for including Aurelian Townshend, but he also suggests that you could have included this poem by Townshend into the volume. See how beautifully he has read these poets exhaustively in order to give such a critical suggestion to a great professor. Therein lies the beauty of this particular essay, 1921 essay. You can approach it, read it once again from your own perspective, enjoy it, try to underline expressions. This is a very simple poem. Try to underline the words you find difficult. You can message me, or you can mail me. I'll be able to respond, right? And as regards the primary and the secondary imagination, since I think it was Deepika who asked me, I have a few books with me that I think should be available there. The Romantic Imagination, right? This is a book by Morris Bora, right? This is a book that I always recommend. There, there are pages and pages on right? What is that? Coleridge, The Romantic Imagination by Morris Bora. We used it when we were in our college days. And another book would be Coleridge had a great influence from the German Romantics, Schelling especially, right? There are many books. This is one book that is a must read, right? I am reading this for the second time now. I'm not exaggerating, second time, and I find it so enthralling, right? You find how the English poets and the English writers found their inspiration and influence from the Germans. German Romanticism proved the groundwork for the English Romantics, and Schelling is here. And Coleridge got a lot of his influence from Schelling. And one more book is, this book by um, Nicholas Rowe, right? I think you can see it. Uh, right, Nicholas Rowe. This book also, Romanticism again, right? A beautiful expostulation on Coleridge and his theory of imagination, right? A few other books are there. I'll just give you the names. One book, right, I can give you the name is, um, the title of the book is Coleridge's Imagination, right? Coleridge's Imagination, apostrophe S, right? Essays in Memory of Pete Labor. It's a wonderful book, but it is in PDF. If you want, I can send you that book also. You'll find it so, engaging and so rewarding a read, right? Hope it helps. Thank you now. I think I've taken some of your time. And in case you have my portions for your CA for literary criticism, you'll be having the Metaphysical Poets alone, because there are 3 who are giving it. And for my portion, it will be the Metaphysical Poets. It will be an open book test. Don't worry about it. You need not write anything from memory. But I would want your critical perspectives. That is more important for me, not just verbal diarrhea, they call it. No, just not like that, just like that, reproducing whatever is there. I don't want that. What is something that you have absorbed and you want to put it down on paper from your own perspective? I feel like that you should say, like Eliot, imagine yourself as a critic and then write down your thoughts, right? All the best for your CAs. I think POCO, we have one more class. I'll try to do justice to one more poem. Whatever has been done will be asked for your exams. All the best. Have a happy weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.